HOP has 5 guiding principles that have laid a foundation for a new philosophy on human performance. HOP stands for Human and Organizational Performance. It looks at how we treat people in the workplace and how they interact with systems. Those 5 guiding principles have really driven the industry to take a new look at human performance. And we here at System Improvements have always been a proponent of driving the right thinking when it comes to human factors and human performance. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about these different key elements of HOP and how those meld perfectly with the key elements of TapRooT. So the first thing to understand is, what are the 5 principles of HOP? So the first principle is people make mistakes. When we think about human performance and we think about humans, we have to recognize that people are not the most reliable safeguards. And yet we have to get work done. We have to have and engage people in industry. They've got to complete complex tasks that are difficult because we need either an industry to extract resources, values, put things together, provide value for customers, make all these interactions in our system function. And for that, we need people engaging with those. And we have to recognize that when we have people in a system, they're going to make mistakes. So first principle is about people making mistakes. The second principle is blame fixes nothing. We have to recognize that people are going to make a mistake, and we have to look and say, instead of blaming the person and saying you've screwed up, we need to then look and say, okay, what went wrong and how can we set you up for success in the future? So getting away from blame, getting away from focusing on the individual is important, which leads into kind of that third principle. 3, context drives action. Because it's the actions that people take that lead up to system failures, that lead up to things breaking down. And so we look at the actions that occur in our system, and we recognize that those actions have things about them that set people up. People make decisions for a reason. Maybe they were in a hurry. Maybe there was some job pressure. Maybe there's something in the system that's causing this person to be under certain amounts of stress. And we have to understand the context behind their actions and what in our system is causing people to make good choices and bad choices. So looking at that, we realize that there is a problem. People are making mistakes. If we can't blame somebody, we need to then look at what should we be doing. So the fourth principle is learning is the key to improvement. We need to take these mistakes and instead of thinking of them as problems, instead of thinking of them as issues of an individual, a moral failing of the person that screwed up, we need to instead think of them as nuggets of opportunity. Opportunity to fix an issue in our system that this person has found. They've found a problem in our system. So we need to find these nuggets of opportunity and capitalize on them to improve our system and make system response better, more resilient, more reliable. The fifth principle is how we respond to those mistakes matters. When we look at people making mistakes, we understand the context in which they made a mistake. We recognize that learning is important. The way that we respond to those issues matters. So we want to look at our system. We want to look at how we approach failure, how we're driving learning in our organization, how we're engaging with our workforce to better understand the context in which they're doing work, and look at how we can support people to reduce mistakes and get away from a blame culture and move towards an opportunity vision-based culture, where every mistake is an opportunity and that we come together with operators to better improve our systems and make them more resilient and more reliable. Now, These key principles, you might think, well, those are obvious and easy, right? Those are clear. But what we've seen time and time again with clients and with people all over the world is that they might get one or two of these right, but they still seem to miss out on the leadership elements involved, and they don't have a good system to be systematic about their approach to learning. So TapRooT predates Hop. We've been doing investigations, root cause analysis, and learning since the mid-'80s. And our system has grown and said, we want to change the way people think about systems, think about human performance, and think about incidents, and get away from blame vision, where we're blaming operators for making a mistake, crisis management vision, where we're just focused on getting the systems operational and firefighting, putting out the fires and getting back to business as usual. We want to think about opportunities. How can we capitalize on our opportunities, and how can we strengthen our system to make it easier for people to do right, harder for people to make mistakes? There's 4 key elements in TapRooT. These elements drive our philosophy for how our process works. The first element is you must understand what happened before you can understand why it happened. We believe that when investigating accidents or success, we have to understand what before we get into why. A lot of RCA processes, a lot of learning techniques jump right into, well, we've got these things and we know this stuff and we're going to do this action. They jump right into the corrective action side, and they don't take the time to understand what is actually occurring. So with TapRooT, we build what we call a snap chart. It's a visual timeline of what happened. When we think about from a learning perspective, it's the process. We map out our process. What actually happens? What are the actions that people take? And what is the context behind those actions? The procedures, the policies, the history of action. What is it actually like in the field? What's the human performance elements that we see people engaging with? So we take all that context, all that information, and we put it into our snap chart to better understand the what before we start looking at the why. 2, systems break down in multiple places that allow people to make mistakes. The next guiding philosophy, key element of TapRooT, is that systems break down in multiple places, and that's what's allowing people to make mistakes. When we look at our system, you can either be setting people up for success or setting them up for failure. And oftentimes, when someone made a mistake, the system was setting them up. You might have an operator who was doing the job the way they've always done it. And when we look at that and see, oh, yeah, they made a mistake. Well, they should have used the procedure, right? There's a supervisor saying, they should have been using the procedure. The procedure, always follow those. They weren't using it, it's their fault. Well, we do some investigating, we start gathering context, and we find out that the procedure doesn't cover this action. That the procedure is out of date, that it's old, that it doesn't have information that's relevant to the job they're doing. So they'd stop following it. Gathering context, gathering information, and looking at how the system breakdowns lead to people making mistakes, failed catches, and equipment failures, looking for those different causal factors can help us better understand the context behind what happened. So TapRooT, we call those causal factors. So we gather information on our snap chart and we find where our system breakdowns, the mistakes, errors, failures, where that system broke down at, and gather all of that context so we better understand what happened. 3, you can make systems more reliable by putting in place effective human performance best practices. The third element in TapRooT is that you can make systems more reliable. You can make systems more reliable by putting in place effective human performance best practices. That if we can apply human performance knowledge, and if we can take that knowledge and look for opportunities to apply that knowledge, we can strengthen systems. Oftentimes people, they take kind of they've got a hammer and they look for a nail, right? Training is the hammer and we're just going to find all those nails, and we treat everything like a nail because we've got this hammer of training. We're trying to fix problems with training, training, and more training. TapRooT says, hold on. What was the context behind this incident that we've looked at? Is training the solution? No, there may be other human performance best practices that we need to look at. We need to look at how the system is built, how the human engineering is set up, how people interact with their equipment, the context and work environment that they're working in. Think of those human elements. Think about the supervision and work direction elements. How did we prepare for this work? How did we choose who was going to be doing it? And what type of supervision was there while doing it? Again, all of these things of context and information, we can use our expertise at TapRooT to give you the right questions to help you better understand what's missing in your system that's leading to those mistakes. Lastly, the fourth key element is corrective actions must go beyond discipline training and procedures. If you're just doing discipline training and procedures as your corrective actions, you're not making your system more resilient. You're treating people as a safeguard, and they're not reliable as safeguards, right? Remember that first principle of HOP? People make mistakes. So if you're relying on just training and procedures and discipline, you're going to see the same thing happen again and again. You're going to see mistakes happen again and again. And what's the definition of doing the same thing again and again and expecting different results? It's insanity. So look at these four elements. You've got to understand what happened. Systems break down in multiple places. We've got to put in place effective human performance best practices to make systems more reliable, and corrective actions have to go beyond discipline and training. How does that fit with people make mistakes, blame fixes nothing, context drives action, learning is key, and how we respond matters? Well, I think the most obvious one is the first two. People make mistakes, and blame fixes nothing. Both of those align perfectly with the fact that TapRooT looks at how systems break down in multiple places, how systems drive people to make mistakes, and that if we put in place good human performance corrective actions, we can reduce those human performance mistakes. Likewise, when we think about context, I've got to gather that context and understand it. We believe that building a snapshot, that timeline, that layout of our process is critical in understanding context. We also think that you've got to look at the different human performance elements when collecting information. Because if I just go with what I know and my knowledge base, I'm going to be making bias-based learning. So this is where that response, that element number 5, how we respond matters. If you're doing, I call it bias-based investigations, where your experience and your bias is driving your output. What I mean by that, I think of a 5 whys. 5 whys is a really great example of bias-based. I can look at a system and say, well, why did it fail? Well, why did this person make this mistake? Well, they didn't have this. Well, why didn't they have that? Well, this issue occurred. Well, why did that issue occur? This. I can go down that causal link and find a problem to fix. But how do I know that that's real and that problem is actually tied back to that original error? If I have a good background in human performance, I might be able to ask the right questions and know that connection. If I'm new, if I'm inexperienced, if I haven't had that psychology background or that equipment background or that operational background, I may not know all of the links, the cause and effect links behind our system and those actions. TapRooT believes in giving people knowledge. So the way we respond is by taking an expert-guided system. We give you the same questions that a human performance expert would ask. And that gives your investigators, your team, the ability to ask the same kind of questions and get the same kind of results as a trained human performance expert. They're going to look at things like, was the person excessively fatigued, impaired, upset, bored, distracted, or overwhelmed? They'll look at things like human-machine interface. How did we interact with our systems? We'll look at team performance elements of how did we communicate across team members? And maybe most importantly, management system elements. How did we as a leadership organization set people up? Are we helping them follow rules? Are we setting realistic expectations? Is there a dialogue between leadership and operations and the people doing the work? Is it an open dialogue where people can share concerns and problems? Or is this a, I'm leadership and I'm telling you so kind of culture? We help people analyze and break down those issues. So where does TapRooT fit into learning teams and HOP principles? We tie in at the same belief that people make mistakes, and a mistake can come from anyone, whether you've been on the job 3 days or 30 years. We both look at getting away from blame. We don't look at the user and say they screwed up, they made a mistake. We look at how the system set them up for success or failure. We all look at the context driving action. What was the information? What was the knowledge? What was the history? What was the work environment, human-machine interfaces, work direction, conversations, all of this information around how work gets done? How does that drive people's behavior? And how do we lay out that information on the snap chart to better understand our system and safeguards? We also believe that learning is the key to improvement. That if we don't take the opportunity to learn from a mistake, we're bound to repeat it. And hopefully we can learn before someone gets hurt. Proactive analysis, proactive looking at safeguards and how we're doing with work, and do people have what they need to be successful? And lastly, how we respond matters. Do we take a bias-based approach to investigations? Do we take a single leader facilitator approach where this guy comes in and leads the team and he's got it works because he's there? Or do we take a process-based approach where your system and process set people up for success in investigations by following good human factors principles and asking the right questions? We believe the best way to do that is with TapRooT, with the snap chart, identifying causal factors, taking those through the root cause tree to find missing human performance best practices, and developing stronger corrective actions and smarter corrective actions that get us away from just doing discipline, training, and procedures again and again. If you want to learn how to perform a TapRooT investigation, the best way is to come to one of our courses. You'll see a link down below for our public course schedule. We've got them all over the world. Find one that fits, whether it's in person or virtual. Maybe you'll have me as one of your fun instructors. Another good way to connect with us is reach out with us on YouTube, LinkedIn, and other places. You can find our newsletter also in the link below. Reach out. We'd be happy to help you better implement a strong human performance program in your company to help reduce errors, make your system more resilient, and at the end of the day, make sure that people go home the way they came to work.